Nobody trusted security guard James, even without video evidence of what had occurred that night. Having witnessed numerous horrifying incidents during his time at the mortuary, the sight of a young woman essentially rising from the dead topped his list. He knew he wouldn't be handling this situation by himself. The police initially dismissed James' report as a prank call. A woman returning from the dead at the mortuary seemed too absurd to be true. Despite hearing many questionable statements, they had never encountered anything as bizarre as this. However, James had irrefutable security footage to support his claims. Once the officers viewed the footage, they hurried to the mortuary. James had kept all the doors closed, indicating that the woman, whether dead or alive, was still inside. Her intentions remained a mystery, but the officers were determined to swiftly end the unfolding mystery. Upon entering the mortuary, the police quickly located the woman. However, what they witnessed would haunt them indefinitely. How had this woman seemingly returned from the dead? What had transpired to lead to this eerie situation? The events inside the mortuary that night would forever remain etched in their memories. Night shifts at a morgue were already unnerving, even for someone like security guard James, who had been working there for months. Despite his familiarity with the environment, the presence of countless deceased bodies still made him uneasy. This particular night would ensure that he never felt comfortable again. A young woman's body was wheeled into the morgue. She died a few hours before and was brought straight to the mortuary. The coroner didn't want to tell James what had happened or why he took such an interest in the case. All he did was instruct James not to look at the cameras in the operating room. James thought this was all a bit odd. The coroner usually did autopsies during the day between his working hours and definitely not in the middle of the night. Why wasn't he allowed to look at the camera footage? It wasn't as if he hadn't seen a dead body before. James helped the coroner bring the woman's body, but as soon as they were done, the coroner ordered him to get out and go on his break. But that wasn't gonna happen. James had gotten even more curious about this case and was definitely going to look at the footage, but he later wished he didn't. He walked out of the room and pretended to go outside, but instead turned around and quietly walked to his booth. The coroner fell for his tactics and didn't suspect a thing. James sat down at his desk and looked at the screens, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen that night. He watched as the coroner walked around the body, not really looking at her. He arranged all his knives and some other tools on a table next to her. It finally looked like he was about to make his first incision when he suddenly stopped and abruptly left the room. This was very confusing to James. He waited for the coroner to come back, but after 15 minutes, he was still nowhere to be seen. James looked at all the security screens, but the coroner wasn't inside the morgue anymore. He rewound the footage and noticed the coroner leaving the building. But why? After another 10 minutes, James decided to investigate. What if something happened outside? The odds were small because of the low crime rates, but still, what if there was more to this story? What if this was all connected to the body? All these questions filled James's head as he slowly walked to the front door. He pushed the door open and shone his flashlight into the darkness. It was quiet and pitch black outside. He only heard the rumble of the building's air conditioning. He didn't notice a vehicle in the parking lot that wasn't there before. He was about to head back inside when he heard a strange noise. "Hello? Someone there?" But no one answered. James shrugged and headed back inside. He closed the front door and locked it behind him. This way, if the coroner returned, he'd have to call James to be let in. James walked through the empty hallways, initially to go back to his booth, but something changed his mind. The thought of the mysterious body lying in the empty room made him change his course. He walked past the door to his booth and straight to the autopsy room. His heart was racing in his chest as he reached for the doorknob. He took a deep breath and swung the door open. There she was, lying on a cold autopsy table. James had never seen a dead body before in real life. At least he hadn't watched a lot of crime movies. But at the morgue, he only saw the bags the bodies were in. James looked at the woman's pale skin. She looked so peaceful, but it wouldn't last long. He walked around the table but kept a safe distance. He didn't want to risk tampering with evidence. Being in this room without the coroner was bad, but having his fingerprints on her skin would be even worse. He'd stay in the room for a couple more minutes. But then something happened. As James walked back to the door, he noticed something about the body. The woman's arms had been lying straight next to her body the whole time, but suddenly they were a bit arched. That wasn't possible, was it? James hoped he imagined it, but there was only one way to find out. He walked back to his booth at a fast pace, but just as he was about to open his door, the doorbell rang. This startled James, and his heart started racing again. He hesitantly walked to the front door and asked who it was. No answer. James slowly pushed the door open, but there was no one there. This evening was getting weirder by the minute. James hurried back to his booth and sat back in his seat. He turned around to the screens in search of the autopsy room, but he failed to find it. Strange, it should be on here. He looked again and suddenly realized what was going on. The autopsy room could be seen on one of the screens, but something was different. While he'd been looking at a recording of the woman lying on the operation table, that table had now moved to a different spot in the room. James could barely believe his eyes. He quickly started checking the data. If not by chance, a recording of yesterday had started playing because the current footage was missing. It was rare, but it had happened before. But he was quickly able to determine that the footage was in fact live, and James felt his heart sink. What might have occurred there? Perhaps the table with the young woman had shifted when he closed the door behind him. The only way to confirm this was to review the footage, particularly the moments when he was still in the room. And he didn't need to review much, as even before he returned to his original position, James had found the answer he sought. However, it was likely the answer that frightened him the most. Despite the footage's poor quality, it clearly showed the body moving. The young woman was shifting from side to side on the operating table, causing it to move as well. While James knew that people could experience muscle spasms after death, they typically didn't occur so long after passing, and certainly not in such a consistent manner. There had to be another explanation. As it turned out, the woman was not deceased at all. The accident she had been involved in had nearly left her in a coma, but she had managed to awaken herself. It was a significant oversight for the doctor at the scene to have missed this. The police promptly transported her to a hospital for the necessary care.